Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Liliana Śmiech, and I would like to welcome you warmly on today's event, the comparison of the situation on the Polish-Belarusian border and immigration crisis in Hungary, differences and similarities. The event is organized in cooperation with Warsaw Institute and the Migration Research Institute from Hungary. I would like also to welcome our special guest today, Szabolcs Janik, the Deputy Director at the Migration Research Institute.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me today.
And Tomasz Grzywaczewski, expert in Central and Eastern Europe studies, journalist, experts, and traveler.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, so without further ado, let us start with the current crisis. The situation on the Polish-Belarusian border is very dynamic. Tomasz, could you describe us what is the situation, where do migrants come from, and how do they get into Europe?
Okay, right now there are like thousands of migrants, mainly from Middle East, but not only, also from Africa, which are in the territory of Belarus and that are stuck on the Polish-Belarusian border. Of course, there is no overland route from Middle East to Belarus. So all these people were transported to Belarus by planes, and this is, I think, the most important facet of this crisis, that it was planned, prepared, and right now is conducted by both Minsk and Russian regime. So this is not a natural migration crisis. There were no any event, like political event, let's say a war, that started this crisis. It was created totally artificially. So most of the people there are Iraqis, but as I mentioned, there are also people from Syria, from Northern Africa. There are also people from Sub-Saharan Africa. As far as we know, there are also some migrants who were living in Russia and who decided to move from Russia to Belarus to try to enter European Union. So the ethnic and national composition of the migrants is quite complex. Most of them, as I came by planes from Iraq, but there were also reported flights from Dubai, from Damascus, from Lebanon. Also, until recently, Istanbul served as a hub for migrants trying to reach Minsk by planes.
Thank you. We also know from the history that Hungary has also experienced a migration crisis. Szabolcs, so how did the migration crisis looked in the past in Hungary? And do you see any similarities according to the current crisis that it's on the Polish-Belarusian border?
Well, thank you very much again. As far as I can see, there are some minor similarities if we compare the two situations, but on the other hand, I see rather differences. In the summer of 2015, hundreds of thousands of migrants reached Hungary on the Western Balkan route, and earlier these people crossed the Turkish-Greek border irregularly. And this was a mixed flow of Syrians fleeing the war in their country and other peoples of the MENA region escaping poor economic conditions and poverty in the hope of a better life in Western Europe. In that year, Hungary received more than 100,000 and 77,000 asylum applications, most of them lodged by Syrians, Afghans, Kosovars, interestingly, Pakistanis and Iraqis. And with this number, Hungary ranked second in the EU behind Germany in that year. Nevertheless, the immigration authority could close only 10,000 cases on the merits of the mentioned number, because the majority of asylum seekers did not wait for the end of their asylum procedure, and they simply left for their destination countries, mostly Germany. And according to estimates, 400,000 people crossed the country up to September in 2015, since Hungary opened a corridor to those people upon Germany's request, if someone can recall the events of 2015. And many of those coming to the country are argued to be Syrians, even if they actually were not in many cases. And overall, the summer period was critical in Hungary in 2015. Thousands of migrants and asylum seekers settled in public parks and the busy Keleti railway station in Budapest, which were very poor conditions and very unfavorable development for the locals in Hungary. And so that is why the government had to act rapidly and had to close the border in September and later reformed Hungary's asylum system. So I think this was a very huge crisis here in Hungary, with some arrival statistics stabilizing at rather high level ever since. Of course, the pressure has eased thanks to, among others, the EU-Turkey statement entered in 2016, and due to the efforts of the Hungarian government by means of closing the southern border and other measures taken by Balkan states in the meantime. But still, the Western Balkan remains a very popular route for the migrants.
Mm-hmm. I completely understand that. And could you elaborate a little bit on this government actions? Like, how did they handle it, and what did public opinion said about it?
Yes, the Hungarian government developed and adopted crisis management measures already in the summer of 2015. Following the declaration of state of crisis due to mass immigration situation, the most important measure was the physical closure of the southern border with Serbia and Croatia, respectively. A fence was erected and finalized in September 2015, which immediately halted the number of arrivals of illegal border crossings from Serbia. In parallel, already during the summer, the Ministry of Interior started to prepare the reform of the Hungarian asylum system. The so-called system of transit zones was introduced, serving as the only venues where asylum could be legally claimed in the country. This was a key reform measure here in Hungary. 2 transit zones were set up along the border with Serbia. From 2016, Hungary made several further changes to its legal system. The most prominent measure was the introduction of the so-called in-depth border controls, according to which the Hungarian police was authorized to proceed against anyone caught illegally staying in the territory of the country. First, this was limited to an 8-kilometer band from the southern border of the country, but later the measure was rolled out to the whole country. We could call this, and actually the government called this, a legal closing of the country, of the border. And ever since, Hungary has efficiently defended its borders despite harsh criticism from Brussels and other member states. In the meantime, proceedings were also launched against Hungary before the Court of Justice of the European Union, which found Hungary to be acting in violation of EU law. For example, in a ruling of May 2020, the system of transit zones was found to be conflicting the rules of detention of the EU. The government terminated the transit zones within 2 days to comply with this ruling. And as far as I can see, the Polish government has taken a very similar path compared to Hungary, since it has adopted important legal changes and has started to construct a high-tech fence system along its border with Belarus. In 2015, Hungary was kind of a pioneer in the EU and the region. Now, Poland well fits into the row with Greece, Lithuania, Latvia, and so on. So these steps are very similar to what Hungary did actually in and after 2015.
Thank you. And now, Tomasz, well, so how would you describe, like, how is the Polish government doing? Is the government's position in line with the line of EU officials, for example?
Actually, during this crisis, contrary to what happened in 2015 and 16, when the EU policy, and particularly the policy of Germany, was refugee welcome, so letting all migrants to get into the European Union. Nowadays, the position of both Brussels and Germany is to keep the borders closed. So that is why the position of Warsaw and European Union is the same actually. So of course it is much easier for Poland to defend the borders. Hungary, as we can remember, was heavily criticized for its actions in stopping the migrants and sealing the borderlands and building the fence. It was at that time, as I mentioned, criticized. But as we heard recently, a few minutes ago, that Hungary was a pioneer. Yeah, in fact, it was. This path chosen at that time by Budapest was not popular, but it occurred to be the right path of dealing with such a crisis, especially right now when we are confronted with using migrants as a mean of hybrid warfare, because what's going on the Polish-Belarusian border is a way of waging a war by Minsk and Moscow against Poland, European Union, and NATO. But I think that we can try to analyze this and to divide the spheres of protection or trying to cope with this attack on a few different fields. One of them, the first one, is like the physically sealing the border. And we can say that Polish government is successful in that term. Of course, there are still groups of migrants who have managed to enter Poland territory and were not caught by the border guards or police or soldiers, but still most of them have been stopped at the border. So it is effective. Of course, building like a high-tech fence is something necessary. I think right now no one has any doubts about that, even though there were some critical voices when the idea was put on the agenda. Also amongst Polish politicians, some of them were criticizing Polish government for this idea. After what happened last week, after this raid on the border, I think no one has doubts that this absolutely that this fence is indispensable. Because right now there is only a fence from barbed wire, which can be easily destroyed. But even this barbed wire fence is helping our border guards to protect the border. Of course, it can be cut, it can be destroyed by some log of woods, but anyway, it is some kind of physical barrier. But it must be replaced with this high tech fence of 5 meters height, if I'm not mistaken. But another facet of this conflict is, I think, information war, which is, I think, even the same importance as the physical aggression on the border. Both Belarus and Russia is trying to convince global public opinion that the Polish state is responsible for suffering of migrants, that Poland is treating these people in an unhumanitarian way, that Poland is infringing international law, and in general that it is our guilt that these people are stuck there, that some of them are suffering from cold, that some of them are, unfortunately, which is the most horrifying thing, that some of them are freezing to death. And trying to defeat, to win this informational war, I think we must do much more to convince the national opinion. I suppose it is necessary to allow some journalists to work in the zone of state of emergency. Right now, it is totally closed for journalists. Of course, it's obvious that we cannot open it for everyone. This is the zone of military operations. It's something obvious for me. I can even say this is a zone of hybrid warfare. But still, even in the warfares, usually there are systems of issuing accreditations for journalists. For instance, I used to work in Donbas, on the Ukrainian side of the front line, and to enter the war, you need to get accreditation from Ukrainian authorities. But it is possible. I mean, you can work there as a journalist. Right now, unfortunately, if any journalist, particularly foreign journalists, would like to show this crisis, some of them are choosing, like CNN. Today or yesterday, journalists from CNN went to the Belarusian side of the border. They did TV shots there showing children with barbed wire, like this very emotional, moving pictures, and trying to say, okay, wow, this is Polish barbed wire stopping children from being safe and sound. Unfortunately, there is no way to show to foreign journalists our narration, to show the truth, because they cannot enter this zone. So, in my opinion, it is absolutely necessary to let journalists in. Of course, as I said, not all of them, to create the mechanism of accreditation, but we must confront the reality of information war, which is as important as a physical attack on the borderland.
Thank you. And what would you say more, like what type of assistance should be provided by the organizations such as European Union or NATO, for example?
Yeah, of course, in terms of European Union, the sanctions which were imposed today are absolutely insufficient. I mean, if we think about the sanctions as an effective tool of international politics in terms of Belarus, these sanctions must hit not only Lukashenko regime but also President Putin regime, because right now Belarus is not an independent state. Contrary, it is more like a puppet state, and Lukashenko is fully dependent on Kremlin. And I am absolutely sure that this operation was at least accepted not in Minsk but in Moscow. So if EU would like to use sanctions, it must use sanctions also against Kremlin. Sanctions against only Minsk will probably hit mostly Belarusian people, who are also a victim of Lukashenko politics. I think this is very important to emphasize that we are not under attack from Belarusian people. We were attacked by Belarusian regime, the regime which is beating, torturing, arresting, and harassing its own people. So, so the sanctions, of course, they anyway, always sanctions will somehow hit the society, but sanctions imposed solely on the Belarus will, as I mentioned, that they mostly hit Belarusian nation, not the regime itself. So that's the first thing. And talking about the NATO, I think we should use Article 4. So the consultation between member states to leverage this case on the international level, to present that this is not the attack only against Poland, this is attack against the whole NATO. Of course, like the best scenario would be to convince, in my opinion, Americans to move their forces closer to the eastern border of Poland. In September, Russia was conducting huge military exercises, Zapad 2021. Thousands of Russian soldiers were deployed very close to the Polish border, for instance, in Brest province. So I think right now there is a chance for a symmetric response and to move some NATO forces closer to Belarusian border. I am deeply convinced that right now the logic of both Moscow and Kremlin is to conduct the politics of force, and any weakness will be absolutely exercised by this regime. So this demonstration of force from the other side can be effective measure.
Thank you. And Szabolcs, could you tell us, like from the Hungarian perspective, like what assistance should be provided in your opinion to somehow solve this problem?
Yes, of course, we have some lesser lessons in this regard, what the EU should do and not do actually, if we talk about any assistance to be provided to address a migration crisis. Generally speaking, I think the EU should help its member states that are responsible for protecting an external Schengen border, in this case, Poland and the Baltic states. Currently, this is a matter of security in the very first place. Uncontrolled mass immigration is a threat to public security. And if the EU and the member states cannot secure their borders, then the Schengen system loses its meaning, definitely. And I'm optimistic that the EU has understood what is at stake this time, because I mostly see supporting statements on the side of the Council and the Commission, and of course, whether the EU will found any physical border protection measures or not remains a question. But the chances for this are much better than ever before, which is, I think, a key development compared to previous years and other member states who erected any kind of physical barrier at their borders. Until then, I think member states seemingly offer substantial help to Poland and the Baltic states, which is a good thing. And the international communities seem to efficiently pressurize key transit countries, as we heard from Tomasz, which is also a good and promising development. Because the migrants heading to Minsk uh, will find we'll face more difficulties this time to get to Minsk. So I think the supply of migrants from the Middle East can be reused, moderated this way, including Turkey, Dubai, etc. So this is a promising way to cut the supply of migrants before they reach actually Belarus. And of course, as for the future, I think the policy of sanctions should be moved forward, because the already accepted and adopted sanctions in 4 rounds, if you look back from 2020, seem to be effective and hit at the very heart of the Belarusian regime. That's why actually I think Lukashenko has decided to use migrants as a weapon against the European Union and its neighboring states, including Poland and the Baltic states. So I think what we see here is a classical chicken game between two parties, the European Union and the Belarusian regime, and we don't know who will be able to defeat the other party. But I think the EU does it right if it keeps on its sanctions policy and try to make Lukashenko's regime surrender. We will see whether this is a possible option or scenario that can be reached in the short run. Actually, I'm not that optimistic. I expect a prolonged crisis covering the upcoming weeks or months. So I think Poland does it right if it gets prepared for these events and for these migratory developments along its border.
Yeah, and Tomasz, I have for you much more theoretical question. Do you think that this is possible, that this type of conflict will never happen again in the future? Are there like any instruments that can stop um, such conflicts?
Oh, actually, I'm pretty sure that such conflicts definitely will happen in the future. I mean, different regimes have already found out that using migrants as a weapon is effective. As Szabolcs mentioned about Turkey and Erdogan behavior in 2015, 2016, it was some kind of precedent. I mean, the situation was a bit different because that crisis was partially natural, but still, like the inflow of migrants at that time was supported by Ankara. So, and right now we can see that this using migrants, it is really really effective. Like the crisis, I mean, this year crisis has started in, if I'm not mistaken, May, June in Lithuania. So it's already almost half a year of ongoing crisis, and the tension is rising, not decreasing. So if politicians, particularly authoritarian politicians, realize that the political tool is effective, there is no any there is no chance that they will not try to use it in the future. And of course the problem is that democratic states are particularly vulnerable in terms of this kind of hybrid warfare, because public opinion, all of us, I think we feel empathy towards the people there on the border. We can feel that there is a moral duty to help these people, not to let helpless human being to be stuck in the extreme harsh conditions, not to let children be stuck under the barbed wire. So this is also this. I think this shows how cynical Lukashenko, Putin, and other authoritarian regimes are. They know very well that we try to stick to the values in which we believe, to the human rights, to the to protecting hopeless human beings. And that is why they know that when they start this crisis, it will be extremely hard of us to try to answer the questions, let them or not. And if not, how to explain our compatriots, how to explain public opinion that we are letting these people to be there. In Poland, the discussion was extremely hot. I think in September, in October, a lot of activists, journalists, also politicians were trying to, in Poland, were convinced that Polish government is not acting right, that what Poland is doing is a cruelty. I think it has rapidly changed last week, really. I mean, the pictures of hundreds and today thousands of migrants trying to storm the border convinced most of public opinion that we need to protect the border. But until last week, I think the public opinion had been much more divided. So this weapon is extremely effective, and of course we'll be confronted with such a crisis in the future. Right now, Hungary, fortunately, is much safer, but it also can change if there are new migrants coming. We are observing right now the fall of states in the Sahel. This is this part of Africa between Northern Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, like states like Niger, Nigeria, Mali, Chad. Most of them are at least partially fallen states. There are terrorist groups, separatists, organized crime. The states are extremely weak, and probably it's going to be the source of next crisis, which will hit the south part of European Union across probably Mediterranean Sea. So so there is no chance for us to avoid such a crisis, and I think we need to try to forge common and coherent response. The thing which is quite optimistic right now is that I think European Union and Berlin has realized that there is no chance to say welcome to all migrants. This is just impossible for European Union to accept hundreds of thousands or potentially millions of people from totally different culture, religious background, social background. The assimilation of this mass of people can destroy the European Union from within. So I think this is something for me optimistic. It's quite even shocking that I think that the most fierce supporters of Polish politics right now is Germany, like German newspaper Bild, which says, "Thank you, Poland, for protecting our borders." When I'm comparing to what happened to Hungary, Szabolcs in 2015, it's like totally different reality. So yeah, so also thanks for Hungary for changing the mindset of the politicians in Europe. As I said, you were pioneers. It was really courageous what you did. But right now, also Poland take a favor of your politics at that time.
And Tomasz, do you know any forecasts? How long will the crisis last?
This is a very difficult question. I mean, it can last weeks. Maybe in some point, Kremlin realized that there is no point of keeping people there, and the sanctions against, if there are any sanctions against Moscow, they are too harsh, and they will say, okay, that's time to finish this operation. But there is also a bad scenario that this crisis will last for the whole winter, for instance, and we will observe not dozens but hundreds of people freezing there. So in the worst scenario, we have to be prepared for the months of tension on the border. But the situation is really dynamic. So talking about any timeline is, I think, too difficult right now. The situation is too unpredictable. So we just need to stay prepared for everything. Also, we need to be prepared for shots, for shootings on the border. I can imagine a scenario when Belarusian border guards, or rather secret service officers, are trying to provoke the response from Polish side, starting to shoot to our soldiers, policemen, and border guards, or shooting to the migrants. We have already heard about shooting into the air
Yes.
to force them to move forward, but maybe they will start to shoot to the people to force migrants to storm the border.
Yeah, well, yeah, the situation is very dynamic. The services are using lasers just to provoke Polish military there. Yeah, and Szabolcs, so what will be, in your opinion, consequences for Europe of such illegal population movements? I mean, in the long term.
It depends, I think. In the form of the current crisis, I think the European Union has got two chances to choose from, actually. In let's call these scenarios. In scenario one, the EU and the member states can demonstrate that they are efficiently protecting their borders, and they will not let masses of people into its territory in any uncontrolled manner, irregularly. And by taking this position, or reaching this outcome, Europe would be able to demonstrate that it stands firmly beside protecting its borders, which would be, of course, a good message, and would hinder the creation of any pull factors, which Tomasz implied a couple of minutes ago. Because, if Poland or any of the Baltic states would let these people into their territories, then it would be a very nice invitation to those who are planning to migrate to the European Union in their homeland, or even in a transit country. So this is option one, or scenario one, for the European Union. Or otherwise, in scenario two, they could let in these people, and this would practically mean an absolute win on the side of Lukashenko and anyone who in the future would blackmail the European Union, or any of its member states, with using migrants, or letting migrants, or pushing migrants towards the territory of the given member states, which is not a new phenomenon. We could remember not just Turkey from recent years, but also Morocco, who attempted something similar in 2001 against Spain, for instance. So these are the options on the table. And I think what we should mention here further is that the EU and the member states still owe us a general framework for managing migration and asylum in the territory of the European Union. We have a reform process from 2016, which came to a halt recently because the member states could not practically agree on any meaningful points of the reform. The Central European states, and not only them anymore, resist or reject any kind of relocation mechanisms, even in state of emergencies. They cannot accept it, and that proves to be a great obstacle to moving on the Dublin reform process. Until this reform is created or adopted by all of the member states and the key bodies of the European Union, these threats and these dangers will remain with us, because there is not a single framework for managing irregular migration targeting our continent, which is a problem actually. And in the lack of very clear guidelines and very clear rules, regulations that apply to all the member states, we will see very similar pictures in the media. We can move on from the eastern border to classical routes in the Mediterranean. We see these pictures repeating from year to year in Spain, in Italy. Now Greece is in a better situation thanks to its border protection efforts and the fact that Turkey more or less complies with the EU-Turkey statement entered in 2016. But still, these countries are all frontier countries that can get into trouble in a couple of days or a couple of weeks. And for the time being, the European Union and the member states have no uniform framework to address any kind of situation. What we actually see, for example, in the eastern border region currently, of which Poland is a great victim and a suffering transit country, to be honest, and as well as are the Baltic states. So until these are addressed, we cannot expect to be better prepared for any such crisis situations. Not to talk about the structural factors to which you just referred in your question, the poverty, what Tomasz mentioned, the instability and armed conflicts in the sub-Saharan region, which are all very serious problems and threats to the European Union in decades and centuries' time. Not to talk about the demographic boom that prevails in the sub-Saharan region. Not to talk about South Asia. I don't know whether our distinguished viewers know that many people already come from Bangladesh and Pakistan, which is a very interesting phenomenon. If you look at the map, the world map, these people travel thousands of kilometers to get to, for example, Libya, which is also a conflict-torn country. But still, they try to get to Libya, from where they can head to Italy, Malta, etc. So I think Europe is in a very big challenge, or finds itself in challenging times if you look into the future. And for the time being, Europe is not prepared to address these questions. So otherwise it gets to some strategic conclusions, we will be in big trouble, I think.
Well, it doesn't seem too positive. I think too many interests in one organization, too many member states with their own views on many situations. So I would like to highly thank you for your time, for your expert eye. I hope that after today's meeting, our viewers, our followers will be much more aware of the situation at the Polish-Belarusian border and the immigration crisis in Hungary. I also encourage our viewers to keep an eye on our website and social media, where we share and comment on news from around the world. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining, and I wish you a nice evening.
Thank you so much for your attention and for the great questions. And Szabolcs, thank you very much for conversation.
Thank you for this great opportunity. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be with you. All the best to you.
Thank you.